You made it to the Go Commando Show with Fred Galvin. On our new mission, we contend with the naked truths of health, leadership, and overcoming adversity. Now it's time to Go Commando.
Hey Commandos, we've got a great guest today for you, Tim New. He is the owner of Onsite Logic. And I want you to think for a minute, if you are a student and you're preparing for your final exam and everything's on the line today, or if you're a business professional and you've got to get this massive sales presentation done by the morning, and all of a sudden, in either of these situations, your computer locks up. You get this notice that it's shut down and you have to pay a ransom. Well, this is happening constantly. It's the fastest spreading crime in the world today. These cyber crimes, such as ransomware or infecting your computer at home or at business with a virus, is how criminals all around the world are accessing your information to either steal it or shut it down and bribe you to pay their ransom. So our next guest is going to talk to you about protecting yourself. Talk about viruses. Nobody wants to get a virus or be sick. One of the best ways I know is you can go right here on the www.gocommandoshow.com website, click shop, and get yourself one of the silver bullets. This product is not just a good, safe product to keep everything clean, because it is stainless steel, but it's a great present or a gift to give to someone or keep for yourself. Make sure you're not infected with the virus by using the stainless steel silver bullet with a great Go Commando Show logo right there, front and center today. The second thing is also on the website at gocommandoshow.com. We have the Amazon Echo. This product can wire your entire house with the appropriate smart switches, and it can give you answers to anything, such as the weather. It can play your music. It can turn on and off your lights, shut the doors. When you have your hands full, Amazon Echo is a great tool. I just learned to walk upright, and I could figure out how to program this. And once it's programmed, it's completely easy to use. So go to the gocommandoshow.com website and click on the Amazon banner and type in Echo. And this is approximately $79 today. The smaller version here is not as ideal sound quality, but it's much smaller. If you want that option, that's $29. So very simple, low cost, easy to use. Thanks for joining the show. And now our guest, Tim New. Hello, Commandos. We have a great show for you today. And this is in the scary world that a lot of people want to ignore. It's called information security. So whether you are an individual at home, or you have a family with kids, or you, most importantly, if you own a business and you have not developed a plan to back up your security, we have our next guest, Tim New. He is an entrepreneur and owner of Onsite Logic, and he is here today to talk to us about his company as well as his track on how he grew up, lived his life, got educated, and prepared to launch this business and what it does for customers across mid-America. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Fred.
Now, Tim, let's get into the core of your business with an example of the problems that you have solved. And if you could give an example or two of, an individual or a business that had a compromise in their information security.
Yeah. So a little bit of introduction about Onsite Logic. So our clients, we've been doing this now for 14 years. Our clients are small businesses who use all of this stuff. That's a technical term, by the way, every day. So computers, servers, networks, cloud, all of that are critical parts of running their business with it, and which pretty much is every small business nowadays. And so we have our main staff consists of trained, certified technicians with great communication skills who basically serve as an internal IT department for those clients just on a part-time basis because they don't necessarily need to hire people 40 hours a week. And the folks that we're hiring for our team are the ones that they would ideally hire if they were hiring their own IT department. What it does is it puts us in a position where we're working with these small businesses who are running all of this, but obviously many of them are running on small business budgets. So they don't have massive departments that are keeping an eye on it every day. From a security standpoint, my message to most of them is if you're not terrified, you don't actually know what's going on right now in the world. As I read this stuff, and it's interesting about how much of it goes back to some of the other things that we've been talking about, the black and white versus the gray within it. What happens when you are in situations or countries that have eliminated the church and have eliminated God and have put the state in position, that people then move from a situation of doing things because it's right or wrong to doing what they can get by with or not get caught doing. And one article I recently read is referring to it as the Wild Wild East, because a lot of the attacks are coming from Russia and China and other countries that have gone through this. And the part to understand is this is a business for them. This isn't somebody sitting in their garage necessarily, but this is a full-fledged business operation that operates similar to how we would if we were going to open up a coffee shop or do something else. And so one of the elephant in the room for most small businesses is something called ransomware. And it's an old idea that you hold a company ransom, kidnap their systems, and if they pay the ransom, then you give them back access to those systems. The way they do this is that they get into the systems and they encrypt or lock the files so that the files are no longer available. And these things are getting more and more advanced and more dangerous. So one of the things used to be that it would be blocked by antivirus. And so they were concerned if they send something out, it's going to be blocked, and that's the reason people had antivirus. There's now a service that they can purchase called a cryptor. What a cryptor does, and these are available on the internet, is it is a packaged piece of software that guarantees whatever you package inside of the shell to be what they call FUD, fully undetectable. So what they do is behind the scenes, they run the cryptor through every known antivirus that exists in real time and guarantee that it is not currently caught by any one of them. So on the day that somebody launches this, it is fully undetectable by every known antivirus company that there is.
Wow.
And these are called ZeroDay attacks. And you can purchase a cryptor for $30 a month is what the going price on it is. You can step up and pay the premium model for $100 a month, which includes free tech support with it. So that's when I say that these are businesses. And then within it, it's gotten even more compartmentalized. So there are software programs that they call anglers, which are just phishing. So what they do is they'll stand up a server. And again, no physical investment. You rent space on a virtual server. Entry price is less than $200 to start an angler business in some of these countries. And it just goes fishing for who has vulnerabilities. So it goes IP address to IP address. And IP addresses are worldwide. And it just looks for situations that are not patched up to date, that don't have protections in, that have the Java isn't updated or things like that.
Soft targets.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Soft targets to see if they can get in. They then sell those lists to people that run organizations that are called droppers. And what a dropper does is it drops a piece of software in that's not malicious. It just gives them remote access into that computer. Droppers then market their services once they get some volume of computers that they have a dropper in place in to somebody who wants to now use that for an attack. And so they can, with the zero-day attack, which these would be, they can immediately put it over into anybody that has these droppers in place. And so they're basically buying fully accessible computers at a rate of about $7 per target.
Wow.
The average ransom that is being paid is $300. So you buy it for $7, or you pay $7 and you receive $300.
Wow.
Now, not everybody would pay the ransom, because what would happen is, instead of paying the ransom, you'd say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to recover from my backup. I'm going to be down for a little bit of time that it's going to take to recover my backup, but I can stand to be out of commission with my systems for 24 hours. So now the ransomware has gotten sophisticated enough that it recognizes there's only a handful of backup software that controls the mass amount of market. So Veeam, Microsoft Backup, a few others. And so those, because they can point to different local media of where to store the backup, have a set place that they store that within their program. So it is now going over, looking at that address, and it's reaching across and encrypting the backup too. So now when you get attacked, not only have you lost your server, your workstations, but you just lost your backup too.
And this applies to whether somebody has an external drive or the cloud and they're storing it in all these places?
So right now they've reached across to take away the local, so the external drive with it, whether it is attached to the computer or just on the network. But the next step is going to the cloud with it and locking out those files. My guess is they'll probably do that through spoofing and changing your password so that you can't get into it anymore and putting you then into the situation. But for a company that has terabytes worth of data, the time that it takes to pull it back down from the cloud is not something without a lot of extra fees that's going to happen without them.
Impact your whole business.
Yeah, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Right. So you're now down for a series of time. It's gotten so bad that there are a couple of quotes from FBI agents that they say this stuff is so sophisticated at this point that we just tell people to pay the ransom.
Wow.
And it is a tough situation. The latest study that was done is showing that more than 70% of small businesses have been hit.
Wow.
With an attack that have, let me correct that have reported that they've been hit with an attack. There are a number more that for obvious reasons aren't reporting it.
Yes.
So there are things that we do with it to get to the hope at the end of the darkness that we recommend with our clients. The first and foremost is to take the basic precautions, because you mentioned soft targets, and that's really what they're looking for. So it is necessary to have good business class antivirus in place, which means not the free stuff.
Yes.
But something that really is focused on this. And it is no longer just enough to have antivirus. It has to be a unified threat management, because something that is not just looking for the thing that's a virus, but something that's also looking for these droppers. Because the scary part of the I get hit and I recover my files mode is that dropper may have been on there for 6 months. So when you recover, you just recovered the dropper back as well and left the back door open. The other is to eliminate being a soft target is to be diligent about patches and updates. Now, people are horrible about that. And so we use some software tools. We have this crazy idea that it makes sense to use technology to help manage the technology.
Yes.
And so we have some software tools that automate some of that and to make sure that it happens along with good reporting. And then the third thing you hit on is you cannot rely just on having a local backup anymore.
Right.
You have to have 2 and 3 backups. You have to have them in multiple locations. And we're starting to get back to the point of saying, let's run a full backup quarterly or annually or something like that and just stick it in the safe at your house so that at least we've got something that we know we can go to and limit how much would have to be rebuilt.
Tim, I do that myself, and all the time I see people, other small business owners that, they seem to have a lot more time, but every document in spreadsheet and any data that I produce, I have to put it in 3 places, just to be safe. And a lot of people aren't doing that. And I even know somebody who will remain unnamed thinks that, just having a Mac protects them because people can't hack into that. And could you explain, some of the false perceptions and the actual reality of what you see? Because this is your industry that you're dealing with every day.
So the fastest growing areas of where these attacks are coming in are on some of the softer targets. So the number one area now that people normally will get infected, and I use that term broadly because it doesn't seem like an infection at that point, because it is just an angler or a dropper. At that point, it's nothing malicious. Nothing has changed that they're aware of. It used to be that the leading place that people got those were pornography sites. Mm-hmm. That now has changed to clicking on ads on web pages, even accidentally. Recent study was that of the top 1,000 websites on Alexa's ranking service, 24% of them had malware on the ads on the site.
Wow.
And the way they do this is because the company, the New York Times or Huffington Post or whoever that has the website, is allowing ad placements to go onto their web pages. And what they do is they put an invisible frame over it. So when you click on that, it will take you to the actual site, but clicking on that also clicked on the frame, which launches something else that through JavaScript installs that to sit on your computer. Totally unnoticed, totally unintentional, but that's how it's getting in to begin with.
Wow.
The other part area that things are coming in through, and the fastest growing right now, is in mobile. The Pegasus botnet is one that most people haven't heard of, but is probably one of the more terrifying. It was identified in August of 2016. It had the ability to run on iOS, so anything that was an Apple phone, iPad, iPod, any iOS device, and Android. It mostly went after the mobile market. Once infected, it had full access to all of the things that are controlled on the phone. So not only all of the contacts, but also everything that it connected to, the speaker, the photos, everything else that you would carry on your iPhone or
credit cards.
Right. The way that it was fixed was with an upgrade to the operating system, which removed it. And anybody that carries an iPhone or an Android will remember how many operating system upgrades. So what's happening is a lot of this stuff is not getting publicized because of not wanting to
scare customers.
Exactly.
Lose market share.
But by quietly going and eliminating it that way. One of the things that they're doing is they're removing items from the App Store that are infected on both Apple and Android. But that doesn't mean that those apps still aren't installed on people's phones. And so going through and doing diligence on your phone to remove old, outdated applications, ones you don't use. Right now, there's so much storage on our phones that we don't think about it, but we may be carrying around things that are infected and have the ability that they've taken steps to remove, but they don't send out a list of what's come down off of the store or what they've eliminated or why, for the same reasons that others aren't reporting, that Yahoo didn't report a breach for 3 years with some of the stuff that happened with it.
Right.
It's not good for business.
Right.
Where all of that leads to is last month, the Israeli security forces identified that they're currently tracking a botnet. And what a botnet means is that there is an individual or an organization that has a command and control console, that they are actively having agents that are out that have infiltrated these different devices. They can then use those to plant in code to do a distributed denial of service attack, so they can shut down the pipes going in and out of a business or a country, that they can do ransomware, that they can steal license keys and codes, that they can look for credit card numbers, or that they can just steal other lists and access from it, and passwords. All of those are easy to get because of how they're stored on it. But this one they're tracking has not done anything malicious yet, but the people, whoever it is, that have the command and control console are currently controlling 1 million devices.
Wow.
Now, to put that in perspective, I looked it up the other day. The total U.S. military forces at this time of enlisted people is about 1.3 million.
Yes.
So imagine one entity, unknown entity.
Largest organization in the United States.
Yeah.
By employees.
Having control over 1 million devices that,
yes,
in a moment's notice, they could turn on to do something, is a situation where...
Or deny.
Right. I'll give you 2 examples real quick of ones with it. So one of the main ransomware viruses that has gone around for a while, it did just recently get shut down, but it's one called Locky. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about it is hard-coded into the virus is it looks for what language you're using on your computer. You know how you can set for different languages, and it will not infect if you're using Russian.
Wow.
So I think they didn't want to have issues inside the country.
Right.
So it specifically will not infect a machine if your default language is Russian, which if you happen to speak it, you could switch over to. That'd be a good protection.
Yes.
The other thing that's interesting is I mentioned that it was the Wild Wild East and how this is growing into its own cottage industry. They've now moved into the reseller model. So if I have access to the inside of a company, and I can now go pass that information on to one of these entities, and whatever ransom they collect from locking the files, they'll split with you 80-20.
Wow.
And so you do none of the work other than going back to military. We're talking about China and the
right.
Great Wall of China. The way it was infiltrated was they didn't go over the wall. They didn't break the wall down. They bribed somebody
right.
to open up a door for them. And so all of the security in the world is as weak as the one employee who passes along information.
Partisan, yeah.
Yep. So our message with our clients is not to, the question never should be is, am I protected? Because you have to think of it the same way with your home security. You want to have a good lock in place on the front door. That's your antivirus. You want to have good locks in place on your back doors. That's your patching and updates. But if somebody wants in, you realize that neither of those things is going to stop somebody
right.
from getting in. And it's the same way with our businesses now, that you need to have those in place. It makes sense and it's the right thing to do. But that in and of itself is not going to stop something from happening. You have to have multiple copies of your data. You have to be more diligent about doing that, because there are more and more people that are getting into this because there's not a religious moral compass in place to guide it. It's whether or not they can get caught with it. And because they're offshore, because they're overseas for the most part, it's outside of the reach of any of our government entities. And because they are so lucrative, they're protected and sometimes endorsed by other states
right.
for what is happening, because they're disrupting the economies.
Yes. Well, what you said, Tim, did its job. You scared me. And that's not the goal to produce fear in everybody. But what he's mentioning is there's several steps to take. Like he made the analogy of your home with the locks and having a alarm, a gun, a dog, being very diligent and vigilant in protecting what is, for especially a business owner, one of their largest financial investments that they have is their business. Something they're very emotional in. If it's shut down even temporarily or long term, just you have to consider the degradation or being disabled with your business because somebody who doesn't know you, they don't have an emotional tie that you do to your business, they can easily shut you down. So tell us a little bit about yourself as far as your family and how you grew up and a little bit about your background.
Oh, sure. So I grew up in Overland Park, local born. My great-grandfather moved to Kansas in 1905, and so they were early settlers into the area. He raised draft horses and mules, owned some land in the area, and my great-grandmother worked at the Shawnee Indian Museum as a teacher back in the day. Been in the area for quite a while. So grew up in the area, went to church in the area, family from here, and my dad worked as a land surveyor, civil engineer for his entire career, worked at the same place for 47 years and retired from it.
Wow. And then what did, growing up, what did he direct, or some of the good ways for you to start learning and what was life as a boy like for you?
Yeah, so great childhood, very loving parents that were dedicated. We were active members of Lutheran Church in Lenexa and grew up in that, doing all of the church functions, spending parts of most days over at my grandma's house visiting my mom's mom as well. So very close-knit families. I think one of the main things I learned from my dad growing up was he was very engaged in the community. He came from some hardships as a kid. His dad passed away in military service when he was still in elementary school with two younger siblings, and they had a bit of a tough go of it back in those days with single mom and some of the situations that they had to face growing up. So as he grew older, he felt that the community had helped support them through some of those times, especially some key people engaged with getting him a job and helping him through high school and things like that. So he was very interested in giving back. So active member in a number of clubs, always just working to work behind the scenes to do an honorable thing of giving back to the community that we live in.
Wow, that's awesome that he's pushed that on to several generations to include your own children.
Yes. Yeah, what's an important thing because we can't be isolated. We do take these days in particular, it seems with some of the advent of technology, that instead of it making us more connected, it's actually making us more and more isolated. I see families together in restaurants and everybody has their heads down looking into their laps instead of talking with each other because they're all talking to evidently somebody else.
Yes.
I hope they're not texting each other, but they might be sometimes. Yes. But it is a good reminder that we are in a community. And we were visiting in Philadelphia, and I ran into a gentleman who had gone to school with my son, with Jake, and he had a really interesting perspective because he was active in his church, strong Christian, and was looking at roles in the community. And he said, who better to serve in these roles than a person of faith?
Yes.
I mean, who else would you want in the roles of sitting on the homeowners association or being on the planning commissions or working behind the scenes in any number of areas or helping with kids or with food kitchens or collection of coats for needs? Yes. That's what we're called to do. And if we're not out doing it in community organizations and we're just sitting back and thinking somebody else is going to, then we're missing our calling.
Yes. And one thing I see about that topic today is when the further somebody deviates from their faith, the less rules there are. If they completely, abandon faith, where do you establish what right looks like and what right and wrong is? And now we have so many problems with, you name it, whether it's, over the last 15 years, a lot of these corporate finance scandals, or, sexual assault. People, if they get away from the faith, or if they think that, I've been very prosperous on my own and I'm at this level financially that I am pretty much my own God, they make the rules up themselves, whatever suits themselves, and then they justify it however.
I agree. And I think sometimes people look at the law or the rules, or for that matter, some people look at the entire Bible that way, as it's just a book of a bunch of you can't do this and you can't do that, restrictions. And yet, when we go outside and we see a sign not to touch overhead lines,
right?
That's a rule. It's not a law, but it's a pretty close to one.
Right.
And it's one we don't have any problem with, because we know if you do, it's going to kill you and it's going to damage you.
Immediately.
Right. We don't have any problem with the lid of the cup at McDonald's saying, be cautious, contents are hot.
Right.
Which is it's requiring you to be cautious. It's warning you to do that. So I think we lose the scope on it sometimes, that these things that people think of as restrictions were guidelines that were put in place to begin with because they're in our best interest. If somebody sticks up a sign saying, be careful of sharks in the water,
right,
we don't have problems with those.
I see a lot of times people feel if they can get away with something, there's no immediate effect, whether it's, even something as minor as like a diet, or whether it's something that would have a delayed effect on somebody else.
Right.
A lot of people don't consider that to be as serious as a problem as something like touching a high-powered line, or, taking a sip or spilling something that's very hot where there's an immediate effect. It's a lot of the more serious problems in life that lead to death or cancer or effects on somebody else, they don't happen so suddenly. It builds up over time, and you get yourself into a bad situation that's very difficult to reverse. So
it is, and it's the shades of gray.
Right.
And I work with kids on Monday nights. I've got a group of first and second graders that I'm involved with in Bible study. About 17 kids show up regularly for it, which is great. But we were talking the other night about temptation and what it means. And they're young enough that it's a big word to them.
Yes.
They kind of have an idea, but not really. So I went back just to make sure I was doing it correctly and looked up what the definition of temptation was. But this is where we get into the grays. And it was interesting to me that there's two words that describe it. One is an urge, and the other is an inclination. And when I stopped and started thinking about that, an urge is not a whole lot different than a push.
Right.
And when we get into those gray areas or shady areas where we like to tell ourselves it's not black and white, but, I didn't do something wrong, I'm just in the gray area of it, that's where the pushes start, because we've put ourselves in closer contact to those forces that want to push us.
Right.
And same with an inclination. The root word of that is an incline.
Right.
And walking on a steep slope, it is very easy to fall.
Yes.
And from just the concept of the easiest way to resist temptation is to avoid it to begin with.
Right.
So staying out of those situations, we talked about eliminating applications, just staying out of situations where you're not provoked by people that are constantly bad-mouthing others, that you avoid those temptations to begin with rather than trying to rely on your own willpower to resist them.
Right. I've seen that many times in people make some bad comments about Vice President Pence that he doesn't even want to put himself near what could be perceived as trouble. But if you're staying away from all these problems that are, whether it's professional sports or the media, or now we see in Hollywood and in politics, there's no advantage to even opening that door up. But we see that quite often this day and age.
Well, and times have changed and are changing, unfortunately, because we used to consider it honorable for somebody to be above reproach.
Right.
Now we want to treat that as if it's a negative because they're eliminating or discriminating as a result of it. And I think you do have to guard yourself, not only from the temptations, but from accusations of wrongdoing, because there's a lot of that as well.
You play with fire, and eventually your luck's going to run out. You'll get burned. It reminded me of an incident that happened last night. I was in a discussion with my own mom. Somebody called from overseas, and they wanted her Medicare number. And you think about a lot of these scams, and this is sort of, we won't go so quickly into Tim's current business, but there are people who are directly trying to hack into someone's computer system, and then there's other people who are providing incentives and financing. This young girl who was speaking to my mom was obviously from overseas, wanting that number, and whether it was her herself or she was being paid, this is becoming rapidly a problem. So people say, what is the purpose of all this discussion? It's because this day and age, there are so many people who, this is a way of life and a way of income to, rob, steal, and destroy other people for their own benefit. And it's happening globally. It's not just if it's affecting folks in a small area of Northeast Kansas, it's happening all over the United States, probably some places a lot more than others. I'm sure those with high net worth get bombarded more and more, and you do have to be more intentional and have a pretty elaborate, sophisticated approach to your security, when you have a business and things that involve higher net worth. So, Tim, could you explain a little bit about when you went off to college, what you studied and what led you to study in those particular fields?
Sure. So I had an interesting college experience because I was one of the first people in my family to go off to college. So I really didn't have a good appreciation. I was young at the time. I had grown up strongly in the church, but very quickly became a Bible on the bookshelf Christian as opposed to one walking. So I didn't abandon my faith, but I also wasn't practicing it or making it any stronger. And if anything, I was in a lot of those gray and shady areas at the time. But I went to college thinking I wanted to do architecture and realized immediately upon entering college that this was when personal computers were starting to come out. And the things that I liked to do that were drawing me into it, I could see very quickly that those were not going to be the things that architects did in the future. It was much more about assembling parts and pieces than it was of art and doing drawings and drafting and some of those types of things. And CAD was taking over very quickly, and rightly so. I mentioned that my great-grandfather raised draft horses and mule teams, and which was a great business up to the point that motorized vehicles started coming out.
Right.
And definitely had an impact on his family to try to stick with that through those times when things were obviously changing. So I think I grew up in an environment of ultra sensitivity to knowing that there are needs to pivot in life and to make changes, not because you're on the wrong path or have been on the wrong path, but because everything else has changed. And if you keep going straight, there's a cliff.
Yes.
So started in college, as I said, my application was to do architecture, very quickly switched over to business, found I had a passion for economics, and got a minor degree in economics and worked my way through college working in music stores. So worked at the malls back in the day. If your listeners are old enough to remember when you go to a mall and there was an annoying guy standing there playing the organ down the mall, that was me,
Right.
the local mall. The highlight of my quote-unquote professional music career was in 1976. I had a white wraparound organ that they stuck inside a supermarket right next to the bananas. And my job was to go over and for 4 hours a day play pop organ to the bananas.
Wow.
And all the other shoppers. But a lot of county fairs, a lot of things like that. Came out of school and got a job managing music stores, got some good initial management experience, but then was very fortunate to get hired by a national organization called Dun & Bradstreet.
Yes.
Which at the time was the premier credit organization for businesses.
Right.
And was, again, very blessed to be picked for their management candidate program. DMB had something that many organizations have lost through the time. They had a strong emphasis on developing within the company instead of cherry picking from outside and ignoring internal. And so they looked to take people who started at entry-level jobs and grow them and promote them into management positions. So I was selected for a management candidate position with the company, which meant for 26 weeks touring to different parts of the country, working for periods of time in all different roles within the company, and really getting to see each of the different opportunities for growth. Through that, I got selected to work on the national training department and learned how to be a curriculum developer. And so started writing training materials for DMB for the frontline credit analysts.
Yes. I was reflecting on a similar situation yesterday with an organization that I'm in contact with, and they don't promote from within, and that leaves a lot of those rank and file employees kind of disgruntled when they bring in some hired gun from the outside that's very talented, but the people that have been there 4 or 5 years and they just don't get promoted. That has a different issue with, retention and having to retrain and the expense of, and I saw that in the military, when there's a leader that is brought in and doesn't have the right morals and ethics, the cost always is not measured on, the amount of personnel that outflow an organization when, the different types of hiring and retention practices and overall leadership at the top decide how not just they're going to recruit, but retain, management and promote from within. So that is great. And then what led you to...
And what I learned through the years was when you're in an organization or when you're running an organization as your own small business, that you are situated to invest in your people. Then a couple of things happen. Number one, their job satisfaction and loyalty increases drastically because they're not just a number. And you're not just a paycheck provider to them, that there is much more of a relationship, a lot more coaching that goes on. So not just sending people away to formal training, although that has its value and purpose, but a lot more of it is in the day-to-day, the conversations with it. But the other thing is it completely changes your hiring, because instead of hiring strictly for aptitude, you start hiring mostly for attitude.
Yes.
And most of the problems I see in organizations are not with people that do not have the skills to do the jobs. It's with people that don't have the attitude that matches the company culture that they're trying to portray. And that's where they run into problems.
Right.
Think about it on any of the news, big issues, people getting drug off of airplanes, things like that. It wasn't that they didn't have the skill set, the aptitude for it, but their attitude that they had may not have matched what the company at least should have been, having as the company attitude.
Some of the employees or even managers didn't think like the owners.
Exactly.
Understand the long-term consequences of certain actions.
Yep. And to your point, getting the right people on the team, the ones that have the right attitude, is instrumental for the changes then that have to happen.
Yes.
And I think if anything, I know there has always been change.
Yes.
As I mentioned, I'm probably super sensitive to that from looking at the history, but I think it is coming at a far faster rate with greater impacts to small businesses than it has in the past at least 100 years.
I think a lot of those jobs and the visibility of those jobs for anyone that's, an able-bodied person of any talent, they can go online now and really see, and that's why so many people, I believe, are kind of transient at the entry-level positions, just moving quickly from one job to the next.
Right.
Instead of like in your family, you mentioned 47 years in one position. Right. In the military, especially in special operations, some of the key things that we look at when we assess is this person going to be good for the organization long term is, their mindset that they will not quit, their morals and ethics, and, can they learn the way that the organization, they can come in with a lot of knowledge and skills, and those are great, but if they cannot be trained to understand the culture that is going to be taught to them, and there is a certain way that business is done, and even a certain way that people want to innovate. But if somebody, wants to go off on their own, those are red flags right off the bat.
Well, and I think for a small business, and most of our clients, we are a small business, most of our clients are small businesses. So it's an area that I live in every day. One of the challenges for an entrepreneur starting out is to get a good feel early on what can you teach and what are the things that are very difficult to teach.
Yes.
So I'll give you an example from our world. We need people that are computer experts because they're going in and serving our clients, and our clients expect them to come in knowing more about the stuff than they do. If they knew the same, then why would they be hiring them? There are thousands of people who have computer expertise in our area.
Yes.
The other part that our clients really need is somebody who can communicate.
Right.
Finding people that have both the communication skills and the technology skills, that's our biggest dilemma. I could hire folks left and right every day who have the basic computer skills that we need, continue to work with them, continue to develop them, because it's constantly changing. So we have to keep learning it. But trying to teach somebody how to have a conversation with the business owner,
yes,
that's the biggest challenge. And the part that's interesting to me is it's not the words, because obviously they can all speak. But the part that they have a harder time with is when they're in a situation where they're working on something technology related, it's taking their eyes off the screen and turning and looking at
being conscientious.
Because it really is a statement of what's important to me.
Right.
And if they're sitting there and they're carrying on a conversation and the entire time their head's down staring at the screen, that communicates to our client, the owner of the business, this computer is more important to me than you are.
Right.
Which is absolutely not what we want to do.
Yes.
One of the things I found was that's a skill set, that communication skill set is one that I have never been able to figure out how to teach somebody. I can coach them, I can tell them, but in the heat of facing something very difficult, it's hard to keep in mind. It's one of those things that you either kind of have this as a natural disposition or you don't.
Yes.
So we specifically, in our interviewing, look for that skill set to the degree that one of the steps we do in our interviewing is we break a computer and have our candidate sit down to fix it. And I tell them up front, this is not a technical test. We're a computer service company. I know exactly what's wrong with it. I don't need you to fix it. I want to see how you respond when it's something you haven't seen before and somebody comes around and asks you questions. We still eliminate 9 out of 10 at that step.
Wow.
Because most of the folks that get into computer service as an expertise get into it because they really love computers,
Right.
not because they love service. And our business is all about service.
Right.
And satisfying and communicating with the clients. And if anything, that's more the direction that it's heading, not less.
Right. What are some of the trials that you experienced in starting your business, from the aspect of time, finance, and even the impact on family, if you could explain some of those?
Yeah, I can talk about what the first year was like, and then we'll come back to year 3, which has completely different sets of stuff. But so our first year, and I think this is one for people as they're starting out that they need to keep in the back of their mind. We did all of the things that they tell you to do in business school. As I said, I've got my undergrad is in business administration. I loved economics. I'm a nerd at heart. So making charts and Excel, there were all kinds of pro forma statements and everything else. And all of them followed this really nice straight line of how stuff is supposed to go. Stuff never goes in a straight line.
I don't think so.
The other thing that I've learned is my walk with God wasn't as close then as it is now, but my wife was praying earnestly for this business. And I've learned through the years with it that one way of knowing that you're on the right path with something is when things constantly go wrong, which sounds counterintuitive, but if you're heading in the wrong direction, evil forces don't throw anything in your way.
Right.
But when you face the challenges. So our first year, we launched in April. We were spending lots of money on advertising. We were getting our first employees on board. My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and 17 days later passed away. So he passed away in June after launching in our business in April. So we were putting in lots of hours, but also trying to be with him, taking care of stuff, supporting my mom, trying to do those types of things as well. Immediately after the funeral, I started having what felt like just a little needle prick and then just kind of a stab right in the middle of my chest. And it would come and go. It wasn't persistent, but it was something that was just kind of a gotcha. And I'm thinking, do I need to go to the chiropractor? What's going on with it? We went down to an amusement park, Silver Dollar City, and I don't know how they constructed that place, but I think everything is uphill, if that's possible.
Right.
And so trekked through it, and this was a persistent feeling it over and over again. So started going to doctors to get stuff checked out. Long story short, or for the course of the summer, had 17 EKGs, all of them showing nothing wrong with it. But through a very persistent praying wife who spent quiet time every day with God, talking with them, she kept hearing, no, there's something wrong. She had an accident at the time. My youngest was sitting on her lap, and they were playing a little game, and the tapping the head, tap the nose, and stuff like that. And she looked away for a second and looked back, and my youngest daughter accidentally tapped her eye, and her fingernail was long enough that it cut her cornea.
Oh.
And so it would repair itself, they hoped, at the time, but she was blind with it, and it necessitated keeping the eye immobile, which meant that they also needed to darken the other eye, because if you move one eye, the other moves along with it, even if you have your eyes closed or a patch over one. So she sat for days in the darkness, just keeping her eyes closed, and spent a lot of that time praying. and through all of it kept hearing the same message that this is bigger, you need to pay attention, something's going on with it. So I was 41 years old at the time, young. We finally end up at a doctor. Well, at first I made the rounds. I went to a pulmonologist who was one that was sent by God, because he said, this is not your lungs. I think it's your heart. And he sent me home with nitroglycerin tablets. If anybody ever needs to get their wife's attention, letting her find that you're carrying nitroglycerin tablets on your keychain and you haven't bothered to mention it, get somebody's attention real quick.
Sure.
But we go together to the 19th or 20th visit to different cardiologists, and he says, I'm 99% sure that this has absolutely nothing to do with your heart. But if it'll make your wife happy, there's one more test that we can do, this PET scan. And immediately she heard that that was what we needed to do. So we scheduled it, put it off for a couple of weeks, went in, had it done on a Friday. From there, they said, there's some stuff that we're seeing that we're a little bit concerned about. We'd like to go ahead and get you in, that they'll run a scope up through your leg and take a look at it. Go over, that happened on a Friday afternoon, just sounded pretty routine type stuff. Take a look. And the surgeon that was doing it evidently came out. I was obviously not awake, came out just screaming because his opinion was I should never have been in there, that there was more risk. What he found through it and what the PET scan was revealing was that I had a 90% blockage on the descending artery, the one that's nicknamed the Widowmaker.
Oh.
Because if something happens with it, you don't recover. I had 90% blockage there, 80% blockage on another, 70% blockage on another, 90% blockage on a fourth. He came out and said, we need to get you down for open heart surgery. You can drive down there, or I can get an ambulance, but you're heading to there. The top surgeons weren't in over the weekend, so they scheduled me for first thing Monday morning. Went home, wrote a real quick will and a power of attorney.
Wow.
Showed up 6:00 on Monday morning, and they take me back for surgery. This is September, keeping in mind we just opened up the business in April. They asked my wife if she wanted to kiss me or say anything before we went back. She did, and the nurse then turned to her and said, okay, we'll let you know if his heart comes back online. And she said, you mean when, right? And she said, honey, this isn't bunion surgery. I'll let you know if his heart comes back online.
So I'm not a doctor, but these other doctors that looked at you before, your heart checked out okay, but you're talking in some of the arteries that is coming out of the heart, pumping blood to the rest of your body. Those are what had blockages.
So here was the issue. Because I was so young,
Yes.
My heart beat very strong, like somebody in their early 40s would. And because of that, even though I had those severe blockages, my heart was beating strong enough that it masked the blockages within it. But if those blockages had completed and closed off, I would have died immediately.
Yes.
And it wouldn't have been inoperable. It wouldn't have been a minor heart attack. It would have been immediate death. And looking back at family history, those things had happened over and over again. My uncles had all had heart attacks early in life. My dad had had a stroke. His dad had had some issues. And so there was a lot of family history within it, but it wasn't caught. It was because the tests were showing that everything looked okay. They were looking at how well it was pumping through, not what actually was happening inside the organ with it. So with that, I use all of that to say, looking back on it, I know we were on the right path of doing something, because you can't think of a whole lot more things that could have gotten thrown at somebody their first year starting up a business
Right.
with it. But that is something that I try to communicate to people that are starting up, even and especially the ones that feel that they've really prayed up about it and that this is a direction that God is taking them. That does not mean that everything is just going to be daisies and wonderful and your plans are going to go exactly like you thought that they were. If anything, expect far more hardships than you could ever envision to get through with them the first year.
Yes. It's almost, like earning your stripes. In some ways it's good to have some of those challenges or crucible early, so that, if everything's easy and you just have runaway success, and then 10 years down the road is your first, major, you're really not developing, the leadership. And, some people have those, successes right off the bat, and it's great. And in a lot of those cases, I feel that's why some people don't really need, to develop a strong faith, because they think that, hey, I've done all this myself.
Right.
And they don't understand, some of those lessons for me were learned in battle, where you realize that there's no way. I mean, this is like a David Goliath. This is far, literally, in a, literal way, it's a bigger situation. Like, here you're seeing your life flash before your eyes.
Right.
When medical professionals are telling you in the presence of your family, that, you need to kiss your wife, make a will, and we're going to operate on you, not now.
Right. This
is, it's probably overwhelming, and, you're probably thinking a lot of thoughts about, how your family, will be if you don't come out of the operating room. It must have been very intense for you.
Sure. It was, but even in that, God was moving.
Yes.
And particularly in the blessings that would come through the hardships. And those are in the heat of the hardships, in the heat of the battle.
Right.
It is a challenge to see God's hand in that. But that is, I think, what gives us hindsight to that we can look afterwards and see back. At that time, I'd mentioned that my wife had gotten involved in Bible study, was really getting into it, had encouraged me to join. I grudgingly, in August of that same year, had started going to the Bible study. Started in August. The surgeries happened in September. With it, with the inclination of, I'll go to this, but I don't know why, because I grew up studying the Bible and I know everything there is to know.
Right.
Love that. When I was in the hospital, a dear friend who I'd worked with and who actually still works with our organization brought in a devotional book. She was a great woman of faith, and flipped it open. And one of the first verses that I read as I was still in the hospital recovering in this devotional book was Ezekiel 36:26, which says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. Now, evidently for some people, that's figurative.
Right.
For some of us, God has to take the 2x4 approach and actually whack us up the side of the heart, not the head,
yes,
and put a new heart in you to have a new spirit. But I really believe that's what he did for me, because the first thing that I went back to wasn't the business. It wasn't the worries with it, although there were plenty of those there. But the very first thing I went back to was Bible study. Second thing I went back to was business. And we were back into it within 6 weeks after having surgery. But it set a new path that was looking at business not as a pride factor, not as a reward for my own skill or my own intelligence or all of the things that I was relying on before, but as an avenue that God would give me to be able to bless other people,
Yes.
to understand what it means to serve in situations where it's not comfortable for you to serve, but also to enter into relationships in a ministry field, because I think that is the other thing that we tend to do is we tend to think of our faith life on one side of a line and business on the other,
Right.
and compartmentalize these things.
Yes.
And I know the world wants us to do that, and there's a lot of pressure to, but I don't read anywhere scripturally that that is what we're called to do. Right. Paul had a job as a tent maker. He didn't make tents and then go talk about the gospel, although he did a lot of that. But I'm sure he was talking and praying and praising God all through the time that he was sitting there sewing tents and putting them together as well. And so having the avenue through a business and thinking of it as a ministry field, I think is another one that's really important for believers that are wanting to start a business, is not get yourself into a situation where you have compartmentalized this.
And risk is, I see a lot of people who want to start a business, they don't start a business because of the fear of risk, the fear of the unknown. And some of them that do start a business because, they're just looking at the positive instead of, maybe they're younger. When I was at the university, there was a lot of young people that just, whether they thought, and I'd hear them, entrepreneurship, it sounds so appealing and, interesting, but they're not looking at some of the risk, maybe because they haven't had all those setbacks in life. And it's kind of, I hate to use the word, but it's the only word I can think of appropriate. It's a lack of understanding or ignorance, not fully knowing what time requirements, what financial requirements, how it's going to impact the rest of your life. I mean, successful entrepreneurs aren't what's portrayed in television or the movies where guys have all these recreational hobbies and they're traveling. I mean, that may come years down the road, but the early years are ones where you have those calluses being developed through the time. And I think one of the points that I didn't want to put words in Tim's mouth, but I know in my case, if you calculate your pay by the hour, it's sort of like in force reconnaissance. The more what we call in the Marines continuing actions, the more you learn, the more you realize needs to be put into your business. And if you're a very diligent person, it takes a lot more. You're always in this state of nearly constant work. Or even if your family isn't seeing you work, your mind's kind of, day and night thinking about, okay, this happened, this individual that I work with or who is a client, I need to do this and this. So,
and I think that's increased because we're in a more and more connected world.
Yes.
And you don't leave work behind. You didn't before, but you carried it home with you in a briefcase. Now you carry it home with you in your pocket.
Right.
But it's constantly with you. And so it is one. And as a small business owner, especially during the times when you're negative, you're putting in just as many hours and you're losing money during it. And those are tough and challenging times. I think the part of it is folks that face that fear have a difficulty with one of the things that's critical for an entrepreneur, and that is that as a successful entrepreneur, you have to be able to not multitask, because I think that is wrong and just diminishing, thinking that you can juggle 6 or 7 things at the same time. But you have to be able to walk a number of roads sequentially. There's one day that you have to do marketing, one day you have to do accounting, one day you have to deal with personnel issues, one day that you're working with vendors. And I say those in days, but sometimes it's an hour here and an hour there, and you're dealing with customer complaints, or you're working with the bank or whatever. And the idea that I'm going to set out, plan my day, and stay on this path all day doesn't happen.
Right.
So what I have done and am doing with my kids who are now growing up, my son is in med school, my daughter is graduating this spring with her undergraduate degree, and my youngest is in high school. But I'm having conversations with them now about starting a side hustle. And I don't know a better word for it, but saying you may work 40 hours in a job that is with a bigger company or corporation, or frankly, even going to school as a job for 40 hours. But you tithe money to God, you tithe time to God, and you should also tithe time to yourself. So take 4 hours a week and pursue something that you are interested in that is entrepreneurial.
Right.
And there's never been an easier time to get engaged, because in order to open up a storefront, you don't have to go out and rent a brick and mortar place. You can start something. In order to start a consulting service, you can write a white paper. You can research something and make it available. You can start a podcast.
Right.
There are a number of different avenues that you can do to get in, learn from doing it, and think of it as a 4 hour a week investment in yourself. So 10% of the 40 hours that you'd be working for somebody else, and start building what ideally is some passive income that is going to continue to grow with you. It may turn into something that makes sense to devote more and more time to.
Right.
It's always work. It's never something that you're just sitting back and it's automatically happening. But it's starting that thinking early on of getting engaged in something, and not with the idea of being your own boss, but with the idea of having your own organization that you can use for wealth generation, so that you've got the funds to be able to fund the kingdom activities that you want to be able to help with.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We really appreciate coming in and educating everybody and talking about your experiences and your leadership, and being able to, be alive and healthy to talk about the topic of your business. So thank you very much again.
My pleasure. Bless you. Bless what you're doing.
God bless you too.
To all my fellow grunts out there who in your youth felt it was your duty to protect us, I salute you. And thanks to the listeners of the Go Commando Show who labor on the farm, who are sweating on the construction site, putting forth your very best at the office. You are making a difference. Support the Go Commando Show in our pursuit of bringing you the highest quality professionals. Infiltrate the website at gocommandoshow.com, where you can view all of the podcasts and arm your team with incredible deals on health supplements, commando clothing, and equipment. Every time that you get a good deal, it supports the show. What deals? When you purchase anything from the website, Amazon, healthcare supplements, you're covering our six. And to the ladies on the team, when you outfit yourself in the super sexy threads from Naked Zebra, and yes, I'm talking about in a fuego, you are firing the sniper shot for our commandos. How else can you support? It's simple. You smash the follow and subscribe buttons on our social media. That is how you support us bringing great guests to talk about serious subjects, not the mainstream media's fake news. So thank you, and until our next show, stay in the attack and go Commando.